Actually, just for you remembered now that I forgot to order that book that you told me to order.
I also forgot to bring the other one.
Yeah, okay.
Bring it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm going to order another one on Paul Robeson.
I'll be man setting up.
Okay.
The guy that
Okay, sure.
the guy that was like the mentor of the Nkrumah's, Kenyatta, Nandi Azikiwe in London.
Okay. Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kawale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I have to tell you, my brother, that I remain simple, easy, and as someone suggested, awesome and son of Africa.
Very interesting, very interesting. Speaking about the sons of Africa, a lot of us, the sons of Africa are today in Germany, trying to see what they can do for Africa.
In Berlin, and it's very interesting because you obviously understand the historical significance. Africa is what it is precisely because of the 1884 Berlin conference chaired by Chancellor Bismarck of Germany. That's why we have 54 countries.
We'll talk about Chancellor Bismarck, but before that, let's welcome to you all, our Facebook followers, watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday. And today, like the good man Shaka here just said, we'll be talking about Germany and looking at the significance of this Africa Business Summit and what it means for the continent. Shaka, it's all yours. Your thoughts?
My thoughts, I think, of course, really, it's nothing new. It's a continuation of how business has been conducted internationally. Some of these summits, the organizers call them win-win-win situations. Whether or not that is true remains to be seen, because it seems to me that when it comes to reality, it may be win for the organizers and win for some intermediaries, but sometimes it doesn't seem to really be win for the ordinary African people.
To go back to that winner factor that you're talking about, this is like the third time they've been talking about boosting investment in Africa, especially trying to encourage some of these African countries that export to Europe, maybe to add value in whatever they're exporting, rather than exporting raw materials.
It's very interesting that you mentioned the key word, add value. I know an African ruler that has actually been in power for more than 3 decades. He has actually been talking about why it would be very simple to add value to the African raw materials so that Africa could, in fact, fetch the type of prices, frankly, that it deserves. But how much time do you need to talk the talk about adding value when in fact you have had an incredibly great opportunity to in fact make sure that we could also walk that talk of adding value. You have the power, you have the opportunity. Why can't it be done?
In fact, you make a good example there. You give a good example there. As we speak, there are some countries that are adding value. Volkswagen, a German automaker, is now making cars in Rwanda. And I think a month ago or so, they produced the first electronic car manufactured not manufactured, but assembled in Rwanda.
That is very interesting. It seems like a sort of feel-good story. But when you look at the economy of Rwanda, you look at geological, composition of Rwanda, you're not talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo, which does have these types of minerals where you could indeed add value and end up really making sense about doing international business. Business is good, but you know what? First and foremost, Africa has to pay attention to the issues of good governance. You have to make sure, first of all, that your people have a right, not a privilege, to own an opinion, and to make sure that you are actually a leader leading your people. And the only way you can actually justify being a leader is by making sure that before you make the key decisions that affect the vast majority of your people, you have to consult your people. You have to get into the business of accountability. Until and unless that actually happens, we are not going to be part of this formula of win-win-win situation.
Shaka, maybe to push back a little bit, you talk about this business of accountability, but for the first time, unlike something you made reference to in 1884 or to 1885, the Berlin Conference, then what was known as maybe the Scramble for Africa or the Partition of Africa. Today, we are on the table. We are accounting for some of those things. We are not being represented by Europeans, but we are seated at the table discussing with these Europeans what they can do for Africa. So isn't that a win-win situation?
I think that ideally you make sense. The problem is you could actually be on that table, but in terms of your mindset is not a reflection of the concerns and needs of your people. Your mindset is a reflection of the concerns of your constituency, which sometimes is very narrow. Sometimes I refer to that as people who are rulers. When you're a ruler, essentially you are patriotic to your stomach, the stomach of your family, your friends, not society, not the country. We need to get to a point where, to be honest with you, we have serious, focused leaders on the African continent. Part of the reason why we are poor, why our people are suffering, is not because we are poor. On the contrary, the reason, in fact, some of these European countries, companies and what have you, corporations, are organizing these important summits. It's not because they are trying to do the white man's burden, that they are trying to, for example, implement the 3 capital C's of a one-time great British, explorer, Dr. David Livingstone, who talked about how Europe needed to embrace the 3 C's: spread Christianity, civilization, followed by commerce. They think, obviously, not only thinking, they know that the type of resources they need to continue industrializing, they have to get these resources from the African continent. And the African continent is incredibly wealthy. But guess what? When it comes to the daughters and the sons of Africa, They don't have that kind of luxury.
But isn't that the very reason now these countries, you look at Germany doing that, recently all African leaders were in Russia, United States has done the same, other European countries are doing the same. They're trying to engage us so that we can reach that point where we can say, hey, we are part of this commerce, international commerce or globalization. Isn't that why some of these Africans pay a heavy price to go to Europe to attend some of these meetings?
One would have expected that that is in fact the reason, that that's what is happening. The question is, as somebody once said, where is the beef? Where is the beef? We have had these types of engagements. We have had these types of relationships, really, since the time of the Berlin, in a sense, conference. A conference, of course, as you rightly said, at that particular time in 1884, 85, there was not a single African representative on the table. In fact, it is very ironic that at that time, the United States, which had recently become a republic, had an observer status. But not Africa. Not Africa. Now, when you talk about Africa now has a seat on the table, it has a seat, but the question is who actually sits in those chairs? Are they legitimate representatives of the African people? The reason I ask that is how do they in fact get there?
But these are leaders. These are leaders representing African countries.
That is,
and they're legitimate elected leaders.
That is debatable because some of those people, when you look at the elections that help them get into those chairs, they probably are not the type of elections that you would want to be even organized in your Nyakajeme constituency. Because these elections are reflections in a sense when it comes to the results. They are not reflections of the people. They are not reflections of the will of the people or the will of the individuals who actually cast the vote. They are reflections of, just like dictator Joseph Stalin, who used to be a very, very powerful man in what was once called the Soviet Union until its collapse in 1991. He used to say that all he cared about really was about who counts the vote, not who comes to vote or who actually casts a vote. It was about who either counts the vote or who announces the results. And guess what? He would have been, in fact, the individual that would have appointed those particular individuals who were in the business of declaring who was who. That is part of the African disease. There are some countries that have obviously made significant steps towards the democratization. South Africa, for example, when you look at it, Ghana, of course. Benin.
Right.
You can, in fact, even say the land of the ogres.
Yes, Nigeria.
Even though there are some, debatable things, but
let's go to the comments
here. I think that we need to have leaders, and to have leaders, it can only have leaders if, in fact, they command the respect of their people. And when they make these decisions that affect their people are part of what is happening in the sense that they have been consulted so that they can actually put some ideas forward.
Speaking of great ideas, there is an interesting thought here from Tedler. We are now in 2019, but Africa is stuck in 1884. We Africans are our own enemies. How about that?
Well, it seems to me that he may in fact be listening to me, listening to some of the things that I have actually been talking about. And if he is not, then it seems to me that our views may actually be on the same page. You know Tedler Asfaw. he's been one of the most loyal fans and supporters of our program, Straight Talk Africa. When we used to have a very active call-in talk show, he is one of those people that always used to call in, either to ask some very important questions or make some very appropriate comments. So he does have a point. Africa suffers from, as far as some of the commentators on Africa are concerned, analysts who know Africa reasonably well, Africa suffers from a leadership deficit. It's not that there are no individuals sitting in the State House. They are there. It's not that there are no ministers, who are, holding portfolios, dockets and stuff like that. They are there. But the question is, do those people, in fact, first and foremost, have legitimacy in the eyes of their people? And if they do they in fact deliver? Do they account for the decisions that they make? Because you know what? There is a saying that as an individual, you can run very, very fast, but together we can get very far.
Interesting. Still, let's stay in Germany. Let's talk about the Berlin Wall. Of course, this conference comes on the backdrop of the last weekend. They commemorated 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. What's the significance of that, and what lessons have Africans learned from the fall of the Berlin Wall?
When it comes to Eastern Europe, for example, it had the opportunity to democratize. And there is incontrovertible evidence on the ground that, in fact, that has been accomplished. When it comes to Africa, it created opportunities for Africa. Not that there were no opportunities before the fall of the Berlin Wall, because, in fact, some people will argue that Africa was probably better off before the fall of the Berlin Wall. Why am I saying that? There is a professor, actually, who is a native of Kenya. He is teaching, as we talk, at the City University College of New York. And he talks about how, in his view, Africa was probably taken more seriously during that time. And he probably has a point, because when I look back, Africa did have access to many scholarships to train their experts. It's not only the Soviet Union that provided the scholarship, including a university to boot, Patrice Friendship Lumumba University in Moscow, which was built, frankly, in a manner that reflected the Congolese hero, an African hero. And there are a lot of engineers, a lot of doctors with real clinics, who actually studied in the Soviet Union. And there are other countries that were part of what was the Soviet Union. There are people who studied in Romania, Hungary, who studied all over the place. You studied in East Germany and Yugoslavia and you name it. Those things are not there. And because those opportunities were there, the United States of America, including its own Western allies also, had to make sure that they also provide an alternative, because they were competing for influence. And as a matter of fact, I can say to a certain extent that I happen to be a beneficiary of those types of circumstances.
Interesting. How would you respond to David Onserio Monda? The fall of the Berlin Wall was negative for Africa. The wall signified the intense competition between East and West, assured African leaders could skillfully play one side against the other in order to advance their interests. The continent was more relevant than it is now. What do you think, Shaka?
He is the one that I had in mind, as a matter of fact, when I was explaining what I just did about some of those people in Africa who think that Africa was probably better off before the Berlin Wall fell. But on the contrary, I think that the fall of the Berlin Wall provided some other opportunities that had not been there before. For example, politically, it provided an opportunity for the first time for most African countries to move away from the one-party state syndrome. In fact, the immediate beneficiaries at that time was the Republic of Zambia in Southern Africa, 1991. This is when founding president, Dr. David Kenneth Kaunda, organized an election that he ended up losing to an opposition leader, Frederick Chiluba. But President Kaunda, a man
who locked him up.
A man, yes, Frederick Kaunda, Frederick
Chiluba.
I mean,
Kenneth Kaunda.
Yeah, Dr. David Kenneth Kaunda was a man, when it came to Africa, who, in my view, did not have either borders or boundaries. Just like some of his few colleague leaders, like Tanzanian founding president Julius Kambarage Nyerere, or like the Osagyefo himself from the Republic of Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. These were the sort of people like Sekou Touré of Guinea-Conakry. When it came to Africa, they did not only talk the talk, they actually walked the talk so that Africans could actually walk the walk. Then, of course, we go to former Francophone Africa. 1991, you had a president in Paris by the name Mitterrand. He also decided to put conditions on accessing French aid. He said that in order for an African country to access aid, it had to meet some very, very important conditions. It had to embrace multi-party politics. It had to embrace democracy. And guess what? The first beneficiary of that was Benin. Benin Nicéphore Soglo, a man who at one time had been working with the Bretton Woods institutions of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
Right.
He actually ran for president and defeated dictator Colonel Matthew Karekou in 1991.
But Shaka, there are some people who would argue that, yes, you've given some great examples. All these leaders you've talked about were remarkable gentlemen. Some are still remarkable gentlemen or statesmen as we speak. But there are those leaders who also came in around the same time during the Cold War, or who are ushered in basically around the same time during the fall of the Berlin Wall. But they're still hanging on to power. They have refused to go. 30 years in counting, they're still around. So what do you say to those leaders? Maybe let me tie that with a question. Hold on, let me tie that with another question from Gam Balang. Since African leaders don't want to quit power, what should the citizens in parliamentary states do? Or should we resort to another Arab Spring towards charismatic rulers?
Well, first of all, Guma and Paul.
Gam, rather, yeah.
Huh?
Gam, not Guma.
Gam and Paul. I think you should find a better word to describe those particular individuals holding the highest offices in the land of their country or the country of their ancestors. If they were leaders, first of all, they would honor the oath of office, which is when you actually win a legitimate election, you have to be sworn into office by either holding a Bible if you're a Christian, or holding, for example, holding a Quran if you're a Muslim. And you talk about how you are going first and foremost to protect, to defend, and preserve that particular constitution. So you don't, in fact, later get into the business of shifting the political constitutional goalposts so that you could actually hang on, because your people will not accept that.
Just like here, the Democrats are trying to impeach the president because he has failed to uphold and preserve the Constitution of the United States.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And frankly, when you think about it, Paul, you need to be able to account to your people. But in order for you to do that, you need to have a society that is basically socially and politically conscious or aware of what their rights are and what the relationship between themselves and this thing called government, and sometimes referred to as the state, what the relationship is and who is the primary stakeholder in that particular relationship. The primary stakeholder in that particular relationship, at least on paper, is the people. Because even dictators, by the way, it is very interesting, when they are justifying why they are even in power, they normally tell their people that power belongs to the people. The question is, which people?
Interesting. There is another comment here from Rogers. Hello, Shaka. What's your view on the continued French grip on the financial reserves of their former colonies, especially in light of what we are talking about? You're talking about the 1884 Berlin Conference, where these Europeans sat on the table and decided to partition Africa. 2019, how many years later, we still have France controlling most reserves of their former colonies?
All these things are possible simply because Africa may, in fact, be, in theory, politically independent. Some might even say Africa is politically flag independent, meaning if you were in a former British territory colony, basically what happened was you pulled down the Union Jack, which represented the power, the authority of Britain or the United Kingdom, and raised your own flag that became a symbol of what you called independence. You came up with a very beautiful national anthem representing, the new country, which obviously is different from the other national anthem that belonged to another foreign power. But when it came to the things that matter, the economy was in fact never liberated. And when you have these types of leaders, you call leaders, who actually happen to be rulers, and there is a very good Swahili word for it, by the way, Paul, and you might be a little bit, I know, literate in Kiswahili. There is a word called nyampara.
Meaning the foreman.
Nyampara is like a foreman or a supervisor.
Interesting.
Somebody that keeps the natives in check so that they can behave in a manner that does not threaten the historical bosses of that particular, country or region and what have you. And that is why when you talk about the French or the former essentially colonies of France, which, by the way, a French man will never admit that they had colonies. They actually regarded them as integral parts
Of France.
Yeah. Because as far as the French were concerned, at least according to George Padmore, the man who wrote this classic, Pan-Africanism or Communism, when it came to colonialism, the French, according to him, were very logical. They simply said, if in fact you can learn to speak the French language like a Frenchman, you go to the University of Paris, Sorbonne and what have you, you learn how to, negotiate the forks and what have you when it comes to a dinner table. Then you're a Frenchman. because it is only your culture that is inferior. But otherwise, we are basically the same people, especially when Descartes, their own French philosopher, said, I think, therefore I am.
Speaking of that, I think, therefore I am, what are you talking about tomorrow?
Tomorrow we are actually continuing with a conversation on the implications following the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are looking at its possible social and political impact on Africa, if any.
This has been a very great conversation. I learned a few things from it. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka's Time. Until then, to you all our viewers, thank you so much. Keep those comments coming, and I look forward to being with you again next week. On that note, thank you so much.
You're most welcome.